Madrid was silent under the cover of night. The city, usually buzzing with life, had momentarily slowed down. But inside Moncloa Palace, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez remained at his desk. The weight of the nation rested on his shoulders. He had spent the entire day locked in intense meetings, discussing pressing economic reforms, healthcare policies, and international relations. His body was exhausted, his mind weary, but as he leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath before heading home, his private phone rang. He glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. Calls at this hour rarely brought good news. His heartbeat quickened as he hesitated for a moment before answering. On the other end of the line, he heard a trembling voice, a woman, crying softly. "Mr. Sánchez, I don't know if you will ever hear this, but please, my son is dying. We live in a small village in Andalusia, and we don't have the money to take him to a hospital. The local clinic turned us away. I have no one else to call." Pedro froze. He felt a chill run down his spine. The desperation in the woman's voice was unmistakable. This was not a typical political matter, it was a plea for help, a mother's last hope. He could have simply forwarded the case to a local authority, let someone else handle it, but something deep inside him told him that this was different. He took a deep breath, steadying his voice. "Give me your address. Help is on the way." Without hesitation, he picked up his secure line and called for an immediate response. An emergency medical team was mobilized, an ambulance dispatched to the village. But as he sat in his chair waiting for confirmation that they had left, he felt restless. This was not enough. Pedro Sánchez had made tough decisions in his career, but in that moment, he wasn't acting as Spain's Prime Minister, he was acting as a human being. He needed to be there himself. Despite his security team's concerns, Pedro boarded a private aircraft within the hour, heading straight for the small village. The flight was quiet, but his mind was racing. Would they make it in time? The mother's voice echoed in his ears, filled with anguish and helplessness. By the time they landed, the village was cloaked in darkness, the air thick with the scent of burning wood from nearby houses. A government car was waiting for them, and they drove through the narrow streets, illuminated only by the soft glow of streetlights. As they pulled up to a modest home, Pedro stepped out, feeling the cool night air against his skin. He could see a frail young boy lying unconscious on a worn-out mattress inside, his chest rising and falling unevenly. His mother knelt beside him, gripping his tiny hand as if holding on to hope itself. Her face was streaked with tears, her body trembling from fear. Pedro moved toward them, his expression calm but filled with concern. He knelt beside the boy, resting a gentle hand on his forehead. The child was burning up, his breathing shallow. Pedro looked at the medical team, and they immediately sprang into action, administering oxygen and checking his vitals. The boy needed immediate hospitalization. As they carefully lifted the child onto a stretcher, the mother turned to Pedro, her voice barely a whisper. "Please don't let him die." Pedro felt his throat tighten. He had faced crises before, economic crashes, political turmoil, national emergencies, but nothing compared to the desperation of a mother watching her child slip away. He met her gaze and spoke firmly. "You are not alone. We will do everything we can." The ambulance doors shut, the sirens cutting through the silent village as they sped toward the nearest major hospital. Pedro followed closely behind in his vehicle, his hands clasped together in silent prayer. Every second felt like an eternity. Hours later, at Madrid's best hospital, Pedro sat outside the intensive care unit, waiting. He refused to leave until he knew the boy was stable. Time dragged on, but finally, as the sun began to rise over the city, a doctor emerged. The Prime Minister stood up, bracing himself for the news. The doctor gave a small smile. "He's stable now. He'll recover." Pedro exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift off his chest. They had made it in time. Days later, news of the incident began to circulate. The media learned about the emergency mission, the Prime Minister's personal involvement. Reporters flooded the airwaves with speculation. Why would a Prime Minister personally fly to save one child? But Pedro never spoke about it. Because true leadership isn't about making headlines, it's about making a difference. That night, as he finally returned home, exhausted yet relieved, he thought back to the moment when the mother looked into his eyes, pleading for help. That night, Pedro Sánchez didn't just lead a country, he led with his heart.